What is the latest with OU softball in the transfer portal? And of course, what's the latest with NiJaree Canady? Well, we'll get to that momentarily. Jesse Crittenden of OUinsider.com joins me to talk about NiJaree Canady and the other portal targets for OU. Let's do it. Hope you enjoy. All right, this guy does a fantastic job. He's all over the transfer portal right now for OU. He did a great job on the beat this year for OU softball. He's Jesse Crittenden of OUinsider.com, which, by the way, OUinsider.com got this story covered for sure, everything that's going on in the portal. But Jesse, man, I mean, there's other names, and we'll talk about that, but it's NiJaree Canady. There's, hey, I maybe saw NiJaree Canady at the ranch earlier this week in Norman. There's rumors of visits, all this. What can you tell us here? Like, is the latest between OU and NiJaree Canady and her current process?
Yeah, look, I think the thing that was relayed to me, which look, the buzz about NiJaree Canady, the buzz was there that she could leave or that she could enter the portal at the very least. I think once she finally did, I was told that there's 5 teams that are going to be in the mix, and it's probably going to be more like 2 or 3 realistically that have a shot at her. One of them being OU, obviously Texas, could Florida get in the mix? I was really told it's the SEC primarily that has the biggest chance, someone in the SEC, of landing her. And there's a lot of different reasons for that. I think the other thing that was most importantly told to me, and I think this is the important thing for OU fans, is this is going to be a slow burn. This is not going to be something that happens today. It's not going to be something that happens tomorrow. I think she's going to take her time and visit every campus. That includes OU. The staff absolutely have been in contact with her. I think OU, just like a bunch of other programs, have been preparing for this possibility of Canady entering the portal because, look, man, that's how good NiJaree Canady is. She's not just one of the best pitchers in softball or arguably the best pitcher in softball. She's one of the best pitchers softball has ever seen. And if you're a program like OU, you have to do everything you can to land her. So I think OU has been knee deep in conversations with her for several days now, and I think they know this is going to be a marathon that they're going to have to win at the very end. I think that's where OU is right now.
Yeah, I talked to Justin McLeod just a couple of days ago on the channel of D1 Softball, and he thinks it's SEC as well, and that's everything I've been hearing. But do we feel comfortable saying that for sure? Like, not a UCLA or not anyone else can throw out a crazy NIL offer? Does it really feel like as of right now? And you're right, there's a timeline here that's really going to be extended. But do we feel like it's the SEC only, or can someone else get involved potentially?
I mean, if I was a betting man, which I'm not because I'm not smart enough to be a good betting man. But if I was a betting man, that's what I would go with. And mostly, I mean, there's a lot of factors at play. And I think for OU specifically, look, there's been buzz in addition to NIL money that could be offered to her in terms, and also, think about the ability to compete right away. There's also that part of it. And, OU and Texas can offer that. Florida can certainly offer it. But I think the bigger thing that's going to be interesting is proximity to home. That was the thing that I kept on hearing, especially during the World Series, is that is she homesick? And is it possible she wants to get closer to home? She's from Topeka, Kansas. If that's the case, OU really has the leg up there. And I think what we're seeing in the SEC with sending every team to the NCAA tournament this past year, if you can find somewhere that's a little bit closer to home, which a lot of those SEC schools would be, especially in relation to Stanford. So if you have that factor plus just the prestige of the SEC, you kind of get a bunch of factors rolled into one. She could kind of check off a bunch of boxes. The only thing that I would say, I guess 2 things. One, this is not going to be the most predictable process, so I definitely don't want to suggest that there's literally no one else that could be involved, although I do think it's going to be someone from the SEC. The only other school that I think would probably be involved, I think, is still Stanford. I don't think it's impossible that she goes back to Stanford. I don't want to report anything concrete, but even last year when there was buzz that she would enter the portal, and that was a huge talking point last year, there was a wonder is this all a play to get Stanford to throw maybe a little bit more money at her or whatever the case is. Now, that would still surprise me because Stanford has punched well above their weight the last 2 years, and that's because of NiJaree Canady. They're losing several players. So that would still surprise me. But look, if she's comfortable there and she's almost using this as leverage, then maybe it's possible. So that's what I would say. If you're looking at a non-SEC team, I wouldn't completely rule out a return to Stanford.
proximity to home, I think, favors Oklahoma here. NIL, it sounds like they are absolutely willing to be as competitive as anyone else in this race. And of course, we know what the program's all about right now, 4 consecutive national championships. So I say all that to kind of ask this, because it feels like OU is going to have the best pitch out of anyone out there. Unless there's just enough pressure, don't go to Oklahoma like everyone else would do. Go somewhere else and try to win a national championship. What do you think Oklahoma's best pitch and maybe their biggest pitch? I know there's several, but what do you think their biggest and best pitch could be to NiJaree Canady?
Yeah, it's really interesting because when you look at OU in this offseason, considering everything that they're losing, this is kind of the first time that it doesn't feel like OU is the 100% given national championship favorite going into next season. So I do think in a way you kind of have to lean more heavily on not only the prestige and what you can offer, but in that regard, in terms of the history and the success of the program, but I think you can almost also use that in a weird way with a tandem of, but we're also not going to be the favorites next year. If you come here, not only are you going to be the star, the standout, but you could be the difference, the reason why we end up winning a title. And so I think OU is in a weird position where they can actually offer that, where it's not just about, hey, come hop on the ride. It's, hey, no, we need you to win a title. And that's a different situation than what OU's been in. Even when they landed Kelly Maxwell last year, was that a big deal? Absolutely, especially given what we just saw from Kelly Maxwell, and OU had lost Jordy Ball to Nebraska. But I think you still would have been pretty confident that OU was the favorite heading into this past season, even if they didn't land Kelly Maxwell. If OU doesn't land Canady, I don't think they're the favorite next year. I think it's Texas or Florida. And if one of those teams lands NiJaree Canady, then they're the overwhelming favorite, because Texas is a super young team that's getting a ton of production back. We just saw what Florida did. They absolutely took it to OU in the semis, and they've got a good pitching staff back. They've got a ton of talent coming back. So I think if you're OU, you almost combine that championship pedigree with no, you are more than the missing piece. We need you to come in and help us compete. Be the difference maker. Be the number one. Be the star, be the standout for a program like OU. And I actually think that puts OU maybe in a slightly more desperate position than they've been in before, but I actually think you can use that to your advantage here.
You know this better than anyone else, but in a situation like this, when you're trying to follow the portal and information isn't readily available, maybe there's clues along the way. Maybe there's some things that you can pick up on to get a better idea of the situation. Now, you and I off air, and we'll address those names here in a few minutes, talked about some of the main portal targets that OU's after right now. And out of the 3 names that I mentioned to you, none of those are pitchers. So do you take anything at all? And not that OU hasn't contacted other pitchers and they won't contact others, but do you take it as any sort of a sign at all that in terms of the other portal targets outside NiJaree Canady, it's a lot more position players and not so many pitchers?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm really glad you said that, because I mean, I think it says a couple of things. I think the first thing being that OU not only sees Canady as this true, genuine difference maker at pitcher, but also because I think if you don't land Canady, then your entire perspective changes on what you can actually get in the portal. I just don't think at pitcher, OU has a ton of needs on their pitching staff. I mean, you're losing Kelly Maxwell, you're losing Nicole May, you lost S.J. Karen. What you've got on your pitching staff right now is Kirsten Deal, Peyton Monticelli, and Audrey Lowry, who's an incoming freshman. So NiJaree Canady would fill a lot of boxes in one person. She would fill your experience, she would fill your talent, and she would really cover over your lack of depth, which has really been a thing for OU. The last few years has been their depth. If you don't land Canady, then all of a sudden, I just don't think there's one other person outside of Canady that you can land and say, yep, we have checked all of our boxes at pitcher. Now, what you can do is look at everything else that OU is losing and see, OU's going to have, even though they're losing almost their entire infield, they're losing 2 starters in the outfield, they've got players coming in that can really fill those gaps, or at least I think they're confident they can fill those gaps. Even some of these incoming freshmen, they've got a ton of infielders coming in. I think they're confident they can find outfielders. What they don't really have is catcher, because you're losing both Kinsey Hansen and Riley Ludlam. So really, as of right now, OU doesn't really have any catchers on the roster. They have a couple in this freshman class, that have played some catcher and maybe played some infield or played some outfield, but for the most part, OU doesn't really have a catcher. So I think what you're really seeing is OU targeting a bunch of catchers, and we named some off air, and obviously Kaylee Wyckoff is from Texas Tech, has really, I think, been the prominent name. I think she's been the number 2 target outside of NiJaree Canady that OU's really trying to get at because of her catcher experience plus her offense. So I think OU, in a lot of ways, they have positions of need everywhere, but I think they're trying to really address what they need first, and that's NiJaree Canady, and then it's several of these names you're hearing at catcher because that's really what OU needs.
Yeah, well, any of these 3 names I'm about to mention, I hope if any of these 3 commit to OU, fans will give them their due because they're all 3 really good players. I only question that as, if Patty throws out a go boomer, everyone's going to be, so excited and hoping that it's NiJaree Canady. It may not be. Like we're talking about, it could be a little bit of a slow burn here. But if you get Kaylee Wyckoff, a catcher from Texas Tech, that's a really good get. If you get Abby Dayton, the utility player from Utah, she crushed the ball last year. That's a really good player. And then Riley Holtorf, the shortstop from Washington, who I believe was Pac-12 Defensive Player of the Year last year. And I'll kind of start with Holtorf. Is that kind of looks like someone that you can maybe plug and play immediately if you get her, and maybe she's one of your better defensive shortstops that you have in the SEC next year potentially.
Yeah, no kidding. And I think when you hear those 3 names specifically, I think what you're really getting out of those 3 players are you're getting players that can check a lot of boxes, because given how much OU is losing both offensively and defensively, it's not like you're just losing, this player was a really good third baseman. Alyssa Brito was a really great third baseman. And, Jada Coleman was a great center fielder. No, these were players that were hugely important to your offense. Those 3 names, everybody that you just mentioned, are really good offensive players, and not only really good defensive players, but they're also really versatile. Because you mentioned Wyckoff. She's somebody that's played catcher. She's played the infield. She's played the outfield. So I think if you're Patty Gasso and this coaching staff, you have 5 transfer portal scholarships you can play with, which sounds like a lot, and I'm not saying it isn't a lot, but given how much OU is losing, it's not a ton. I think you have to be a little selective with who you're getting. You can't just add anybody. I think you need players that can do a lot of different things and that can really be 2-way players. That's what all of these 3 players can offer. And so that's why I don't think you're going to hear OU in the mix for a ton of different. I don't think you're going to hear them in the mix for 15 different players. I think they have a top 3 to 5 of players that they want to add that uniquely check a bunch of boxes, because OU's not used to being in this position to lose a senior class like this and to not win a championship and immediately roll into being the favorites. They've got a lot of gaps they need to fill, and either way, they're going to be relying on a ton of young players next year. So the transfer players you do add need to be experienced, proven players that can do a bunch, and I think those 3 can.
Last one, and I kind of thought from the beginning, like NiJaree Canady, who we've heard about for 2 years and kind of carried Stanford to a Women's College World Series, and how she can immediately change a program from day one. Oh, my gosh, this NIL deal is going to be insane. And how do you even guess what that dollar amount is going to look like right now? But do you think that this is going to be maybe the largest NIL deal that we've seen for a college softball player to this point?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think when it comes to NIL, it's an interesting discussion in softball because we're seeing softball get bigger and bigger. We absolutely are. It's not just a little known sport anymore. Every year it's getting more and more followers. Having said that, I don't think NIL has totally caught up to softball yet. I think that is still taking some time. I think for a lot of players, some people would be surprised at the NIL offer or at the NIL deals. They're not these huge 6-figure, 7-figure marks that you might think, given how big softball feels. But I do think NIL is needing to catch up a little bit, and I think it will. Having said all of that, I think a player like NiJaree Canady could be the player that really starts that domino and gets NIL caught up with softball a little bit, because given that it's getting bigger every year, and again, given that Canady is a player that she's a generational player. That's how good she is. I mean, look at her stats. She's an immediate game changer. Wherever she goes, they are going to be the title favorite. I think in that, with that all being said, I do think she is the player we might be shocked at how big the NIL offers are because softball is getting bigger. And I also think because I think if you're another program that's outside of OU, I think you smell blood in the water a little bit. I think for the first time, you maybe feel like, oh, OU, maybe they're vulnerable. Yeah, OU is going to have a lot of good players next year, and they're going to be in the mix, but they don't have Jada Coleman. They don't have Tiara Jennings. They don't have Alyssa Brito. All of a sudden, if you're Texas, Florida, Tennessee, if you're UCLA, if you're one of these other teams, you're thinking, we can get Canady and go win a title right now. So I think all of those factors are coming into play. And yeah, I think this transfer portal recruitment over the next few days and coming weeks is going to be really interesting to watch.
Jesse, you the man. Go check out his stuff, OUinsider.com. They've got OU softball covered, the transfer portal covered. Appreciate you, man, as always. Good stuff.
Appreciate you having me on, man.
In other news, appreciate Jesse as always. And yes, if any big news breaks, OU gets a commitment, have that covered for you right here on this channel. Please like and subscribe if you haven't already. In other OU softball news, this did break today in terms of a player outgoing. Avery Hodge has committed to play at LSU. Now, she's Houston area player. She surprisingly inserted into the transfer portal, wasn't at the championship celebration. We covered that one. Had a good Women's College World Series, had a really good Women's College World Series, made a couple of errors in the championship series, but really, I thought, responded well throughout and became a reason as to why OU was able to win its fourth consecutive national championship. But not that there was a thought that Avery Hodge was going to return to OU at any point, but this pretty much nails it down. She's going to LSU, a school that is somewhat located around the Houston area, thought that she might want to go a little bit closer to home. Texas and Texas A&M were the two rumored schools initially, but the LSU Tigers get her, so you'll see Avery Hodge at some point in the SEC. It is a loss, but as we've talked about before, it is a loss that you can overcome, and OU should still be very good at second base next year. But best of luck to Avery Hodge, and we'll see what OU continues to pursue in the transfer portal with seemingly 5 spots left available. As always, appreciate you watching, and we'll keep you updated on the latest going on with OU softball.